Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for February 1st, 2018. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about a bunch of movie news, including a Men in Black spinoff directed by F. Gary Gray, USA Network and Syfy now being able to drop the F bomb on television. Heath Ledger planned to return to play the Joker again after The Dark Knight, and Tiffany Haddish potentially working with Paul Thomas Anderson. What a combo. In the spoiler room, we're going to be talking about some Game of Thrones Season 8 spoilers, so stick around for that if you're interested. And my name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at SlashFilm.com, and I'm joined today on the podcast by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey everyone.
All right, guys. So we're getting there. We're getting close to the end of the week. I'm sure maybe tomorrow we can talk about what you guys are planning on doing for the Super Bowl and stuff like that. But in the meantime, let's just jump into the news today. Let's kick it off with Brad. There's a Men in Black spinoff coming. What's happening here?
Yeah, so we actually first heard about this project sometime last fall. Now it's finally coming together because Sony Pictures is all franchise hungry again now that Jumanji did well at the box office, surprisingly well even. And so now they're looking to get some of their more recognizable titles back in play, and that includes Men in Black, which now has a director for what is being called a spinoff, and it will be The Fate of the Furious Helmer, F. Gary Gray, who also directed Straight Outta Compton. Now this movie's being called a spinoff, but it sounds more like a half Lego sequel, half reboot, in the same way that Jurassic World was, and that's basically what they're trying to do with this relaunch of the franchise. Won't have any of the original cast members, so Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith won't be back, but I imagine they'll make some reference to the mythology of the original three movies, and I'm sure the agency will have existed long before now, and things like that, in the same way that Jurassic World made reference to the original park and that kind of thing. So we don't really know any story details at this point, but the movie was said in September of last year to focus on new characters chasing villains that puts the picture on more of a global scale than the previous movies. So I imagine that means that the action won't be as isolated to just New York as it was in the original three movies. That's mostly where the alien threats unfolded and the action stayed there. But obviously, something as big as the Men in Black organization probably has worldwide implications. So there'll probably be other agencies from around the world. And I'm betting that what screenwriters, the screenwriters have in mind, Matt Holloway and Art Markham, who wrote Iron Man, is to expand that to include other agencies from around the world, which would likely open the door for other spin-offs to follow this as well.
So it seems like they're sort of going in line with the Ghostbusters plan here, then, right?
Yeah, because that originally there were hopes that after the female Ghostbusters took off, they could expand and do another new branch of Ghostbusters. And Dan Aykroyd even talked of hopes of there being international Ghostbusters around the world. So it seems like maybe they're trying to apply that formula to Men in Black, which isn't a bad idea, and I think honestly works a little bit better for Men in Black, since the idea of intergalactic relations is a much bigger worldwide deal than something like just capturing ghosts.
Yeah, that's a good point. The original Men in Black has been on TV a lot lately, and I've been catching pieces of it here and there. And that is a movie. It's what 20 years old, over 20 years old at this point, but I think it holds up really, really well. HT, what do you think about the idea of this Men in Black spin-off continuation? Is this a franchise that you want to see more of after the first three movies?
I really enjoy the first two movies, mainly based off the charisma of Will Smith, but I do agree with you. The first movie holds up extremely well. It's just a fun, really thrilling popcorn movie, and I think the third one tries kind of what this Lego sequel is trying to do. It sort of tries to build this world, and I'm not sure how well that world can be built in the Men in Black universe, but there have been successful Lego sequels. Look at Creed, for instance, which brought that the Rocky franchise into the modern universe. So it could happen. I just don't know if they can whoever steps into the shoes of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones in this spinoff can fill those shoes.
And Brad, what do you think about this? Just the Men in Black franchise as a whole. What are your thoughts on the first three films?
I love the first one. I hate the second one, and I like what the third one tried to do with time travel and whatnot, but it didn't quite work for me, even though I enjoyed it. So I'm down for seeing what they can do to expand the franchise. I think it's ripe with a lot of opportunities to keep going. I still lament the fact that the 21 Jump Street crossover with Men in Black is stuck in development, because that was such a wacky, cool, fun idea that I still would love to see come to fruition.
Hmm.
But it'll probably be stuck on the back burner forever at this point. But hopefully one day that will happen.
All right, so let's move on to our next item, and that is the unlikely pairing of Tiffany Haddish and Paul Thomas Anderson have been discussing potential movie ideas. HT, what is going on here?
Well, it sounds like an unlikely pairing, but Paul Thomas Anderson has been positively raving about Tiffany Haddish ever since she became the breakout star of Girls Trip. And he has been frequently talking about how he wants to work with her. And even at the New York Film Critics Circle Awards, he, in his acceptance speech for Best Screenplay, addressed a note to Tiffany Haddish asking her, "I know everyone wants to work with you now, but please, may I cut to the front of the line?" And he allegedly, at that point, gave her his phone number. And it turns out that was more than just a awards ceremony stunt. He actually did give her his phone number as a way to reach out and try to work on his next movie with her potentially. And Tiffany Haddish confirmed to Vulture that she has been talking to Paul Thomas Anderson on the phone several times, and they've been discussing potential movie idea projects. And she said, "We're probably going to work together." So we don't really know what this project will be yet, or whether it's really in development. But Haddish said, we've been talking a lot about Los Angeles back when Central Avenue was the Sunset Boulevard of LA. And that kind of gives tiny hints to the setting of the movie. The Central Avenue was in the 50s, the nicknamed the Little Harlem of LA. So it seems like a sort of good placement for a period piece by Paul Thomas Anderson set in the 50s, where jazz and black culture really blossomed. And Tiffany Haddish, even though she's only been in one really big role, she is, I think, well deserving of a movie where she headlines a Paul Thomas Anderson film. Maybe like her own little Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah, so I have to admit that I missed Girls Trip last year, and I have still not seen it. I actually am one of the few people that still subscribes to Netflix's disc plan, so I just
I do
got.
too. I
Oh,
do too.
cool. So I just got the disc, the Blu-ray of Girls Trip in the mail, and it's sitting on my counter right now, waiting for this weekend to roll around so I can finally catch up with this movie. But I've heard nothing but great things about Tiffany Haddish's performance in that movie. I've seen her on, she hosted SNL not too long ago, and she's, been making the rounds, talk show circuit and all that kind of stuff, and she seems like a wildly entertaining person. So she's far more bombastic than than Paul Thomas Anderson's regular collaborators tend to be, especially like somebody as subdued as freaking Daniel Day-Lewis, for example. But if Daniel Day-Lewis retiring means that Paul Thomas Anderson and Tiffany Haddish start working together and she becomes his new muse, I mean, that sounds like a really a really fascinating scenario. Brad, I know you're a fan of PTA's movies. What do you think about the idea of him making another film that sort of dives into a different period of LA with Tiffany Haddish front and center?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always down for a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, no matter what it is. He could literally come out with the weirdest sounding movie, and I'd be like, "Yep, I'll be there for that." And the idea of him working with someone like Tiffany Haddish, who is predominantly known for her comedic chops, is exciting, because one of Adam Sandler's best movies by far is Punch Drunk Love. And so whether he wants to work with her on a drama that has her in the lead, or whether he wants to dip his toe into a little bit more of a straightforward comedy than we've seen him do before, I think either way it's going to be something interesting to watch. Also, on a side note, I'd like to see Tiffany Haddish in the Men in Black spinoff as well.
Oh wow, that would be incredible.
Oh, I would love her to see her in the lead role. She would be one who could step up to Will Smith's shoes, I think.
Yeah, man, that is a good call. So, Brad, let's jump to our next news story here, which is one that I have not. I admit I have not read this story yet, but I've read your headline, which is SciFi and USA will now be dropping f-bombs like a motherfucker on TV. What is going on?
So what's kind of interesting about this is that basic cable channels actually don't have an obligation to not swear on TV. They're not beholden to the guidelines that the Federal Communications Commission puts forth. They have their own standards and practices divisions who try to adhere to them just to be tread lightly, simply because they don't want to upset viewers and they don't want to upset advertisers. But there's no rules that dictate basic cable can't swear on television. It's only the networks that have to adhere to the broadcast networks like NBC, ABC, and all them who have to follow those rules. So SciFi and USA are being a little bit more bold and daring by throwing caution to the wind, and they're not going to go out of their way to censor the word fuck on any of their shows anymore. This is something that we've seen over the years change a bit as cable has gotten a little bit more edgy. Shows on the networks like AMC and FX have been using the word shit for a while. After that was one of the more taboo words that couldn't be said on TV. And for a while, Comedy Central had their secret stash programming block where they had movies and stand-up specials that were uncensored, where they said fuck and all of the words that you're usually not allowed to say on TV. They don't have the secret stash anymore, but they still broadcast uncensored programming after midnight. And more recently, cable networks like FX and SciFi have been a little bit more bold as well by occasionally throwing in use of the word fuck. Mr. Robot did it famously in an episode, and now SciFi and USA are basically just saying, you know what, we're just going to do this from now on because they don't want to have to dip out the audio in order to get this to fly. And for me, it just kind of makes sense. I mean, this is the way people talk. We're talking about shows that air later at night, so kids aren't watching. It has the TVMA rating, so it's meant to be for adults. And at the end of the day, the amount of violence and disturbing imagery we're seeing on TV is nothing compared to hearing the word fuck said on television occasionally. So this has actually already started. When the third season of The Magician started on SciFi, the co-creator of that show, Sarah Gamble, announced that the entire season 3 wouldn't have any of the F-bombs censored whatsoever. So now they're just going to let it go. And so I imagine whatever they have worked out with their advertisers, they're cool with it. They're like, yeah, you know what? Do what you want to do creatively, and they're not going to get fined for it or anything. So from now on, when you watch stuff on SciFi and USA, if they want to put the F word in there, they're going to do it.
So, HT, is this cool with you, or is this the beginning of a slippery slope?
No, I'm all for saying fuck more. I think this makes a lot of sense because Mr. Robot, which airs on USA and is one of the most violent, brutal, and soul-crushing shows I've seen, has tons of blood letting and gore, but I cannot say fuck as much as even films, although films also have their really archaic censorship. So I think that sort of double standard between violence and cursing in both TV and films is like I said, is archaic. So I'm all for letting loose a little bit more on swear words because I don't think it's quite as harmful to young children or families as much as the overwrought violence that we often see.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if this has anything to do with the, I guess, proliferation of online advertising and just like, you know, in years past when TV ads were much more important because that was literally the only place that people could see these shows. I think the influence of advertisers and maybe the network's willingness to comply and sort of toe the line when it comes to this kind of stuff was probably they probably put a lot more weight on it back then when like the threat of an advertiser pulling commercials from their show meant a lot more, because I think now it's like, you know, you can find advertising, you can get your show out there in so many different ways and stuff like that. I'm wondering, Brad, do you think there's anything to that? Do you think this is a coincidence, the timing here, or do you think it's like part of the ever-changing digital landscape?
Yeah, I mean, that probably plays into it a little bit, but I think that more often than not, creators are just sick of being restricted creatively, and if they know that they're not going to get any blowback from it, then they might as well just do what they're going to do, and then, you know, just let the chips fall as they might, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think some audiences are going to be upset by it, but it's like, if you're going out of your way to watch this show that already has, you know, gruesome violence in it, then like, are you really going to be upset that there's some F words in it now? It's, you know, you have to pick your battles. And I've never understood just the sensitivity that certain members of the viewing public have when it comes to language. When I think images of violence and things like that are just so much more jarring.
But think of the children, Brad. The children.
It's like how
hey, fuck the children.
Wow.
It's like how the King's Speech got rated R for having absolutely no violence, but a string of F-bombs and other cursing. So it's really funny.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge double standard there. And I would encourage anybody who has any thoughts about this to email us at peter@slashfilm.com and let us know what you think, because as much as I joke about somebody think of the children, I'm sure some of you out there have kids and probably have some pretty strong feelings about this, and we'd actually love to hear from you and wonder what you think the solution to this kind of issue should be. But in the meantime, let's jump on to our last news item of the day, and that is Heath Ledger had actually planned to return as the Joker after The Dark Knight. HT, what do we know?
So this is a story that's circulating around the geek community right now, and it stems from an interview with Heath Ledger's sister, Kate Ledger, which she conducted with an Australian news outlet last year in promotion of the documentary I Am Heath Ledger. So she said he was so proud of what he had done in Batman. And I know he had other plans for another Batman. He loved working with Chris Nolan and Christian Bale and Gary Oldman. He just had the best time ever doing that film. When he came home at Christmas, he couldn't wait to tell us all about it, and he was doing the voice and laughing, showing me all the rushes. We had a great time. So it kind of is her way of addressing a lot of those rumors and speculation popping up after Heath Ledger's tragic passing 10 years ago. Wow, it's been that long. That he was depressed, and he kind of did this out of some sort of being affected by the Joker performance, but it was not that way at all. And Heath Ledger was intending to return to the role or reprise the role if he was called for. And the end of The Dark Knight did leave his fate in question, because he did survive at the end. I guess spoilers for people who haven't seen The Dark Knight. And it definitely was left up in the air whether the Joker would return, and we kind of assumed he would until, of course, Heath Ledger was passed away. So actually, he passed away before the film came out. So
yep.
That had that air to it.
Brad, what do you think about this? I mean, obviously it's a tragic thing, but yeah, what are your thoughts about this in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely bittersweet. I do wonder what a Batman movie would have looked like in the hands of Christopher Nolan if he did bring back the Joker in some capacity. Because all of Nolan's Batman movies, they kind of picked up after a certain period of time had passed between them. So this, would have been a movie that would have had to address, exactly how they were bringing the Joker back, what his role is, and then, would he be working with another villain, and how would that work? And considering how, realistic and grounded Nolan's Batman movies was, it makes me curious as to what that kind of movie, would have been like. And it really is just a bummer that we didn't get to see Heath Ledger's, performance again, because that's an all-time great villain performance. It's just he's just incredible in that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point too. I can't imagine Heath Ledger and Tom Hardy's Bane being in the same movie and, being on the same side and interacting with each other in that way. So I have to think that The Dark Knight Rises would have been significantly different if Ledger was still around. I think they took their time with that movie and paid the proper amount of respect to Heath Ledger's legacy by not necessarily mentioning that character again in The Dark Knight Rises. But, in a perfect world where Heath Ledger was still around, I have to think that movie would have been a lot better, and B, a lot different than the one that we ended up getting.
Yeah, I agree completely.
All right, so I guess that's going to bring us to the end of the news segment. So I'm going to let you guys go here before I bring Jacob on. Brad, why don't you tell us where we can find more of your work online?
Always writing on slashfilm.com. You can also check out my Twitter at Ethan_Anderton. And if you like movie podcasts with nonsense and jokes and ridiculous tangents, you can check out my podcast, which is called Go Flix Yourself, FLIX, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
And HT?
You can also find me at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Hoai-Tran Bui.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
And joining me in the spoiler room is Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Aggie, you mean Slash Film managing editor and Slash Film's resident Game of Thrones aficionado.
Ah, yes, indeed. So, I guess this is the last warning for anyone who does not want to know what is going on in Game of Thrones Season 8. So tune out now, join us tomorrow for another episode. But if you guys are cool with potential Season 8 spoilers, then listen on. So a new report has come out from Watchers on the Wall, which is a famous, well-known Game of Thrones fan site. They have tracked down a video of the set of Winterfell being burned and consumed in this massive fire, Jacob. This is not just like a tiny flame. This is viewable from the road far away from the studio. This is like a huge thing. And
this is a we don't need this set anymore fire.
That's sort of what it seems like, yes. And a different site called Belfast Live actually reported that the fire was part of a battle sequence that involved between 400 and 500 extras. So this is a pretty significant thing. So now the speculation begins. Why is Winterfell burning to the ground? What do you think about this? And is this like the final moment in Game of Thrones? Are we going to end on such a bitter moment that the final scene before the credits roll for the last time is going to be Winterfell scorched? What do you think here?
I don't think we're going to see this at the end of the season. I think this is the beginning of the season. Because Season 7, as you may remember, ended with the Night King and resurrected dragon destroying the wall and marching south. And Winterfell's not far from the wall. It's in the show it takes people anywhere from a day to 2 weeks to get there, depending on what the show wants. But but in either way, it's not going to be a long hike for a massive army like that, especially one who doesn't need to stop for food and sleep because they're all undead. Mm-hmm. So I think this is like either, if not the end of episode 1, maybe episode 2. This is the big oh holy crap moment that kind of that sort of drags you into the rest of the season. As every Game of Thrones season used to always be episode 4 was the episode that ended with the oh now we're cooking moment after a few slow episodes, but with season 8 being only 6, this could be the first hour, maybe in the first 2 hours. So what do you think? Do you think this is early on?
Yeah, I think it's early on. I'm just wondering if the idea of the fire being the result of the Night King and an undead Viserion might be a little too obvious. I mean, sometimes the most obvious choice is the best one and the most effective one. But I'm wondering if Game of Thrones might have something else up its sleeve. Like, could this be the result of Cersei coming north? Maybe it's not in the first episode. Maybe it's in the first half of the season. And she's maybe changed her mind about wanting to sit out the battle in the north, and maybe she's scheming, and this is the result of her schemes. And I was speculating about this in the article that I wrote. I wonder if this could be a some sort of collateral damage in a breakup between Jon and Daenerys, because we know that they don't know that they're related yet. We have no idea what that revelation is going to do to their relationship, which seems pretty solid right now, but that's a pretty big wrench to throw into that cog. So do you think that Dany is ruthless enough to set Winterfell on fire if the situation calls for it?
Dany is ruthless enough to do that. I don't think she is, because Targaryen is traditionally always married to family members, which is icky, but that's always the case with them. So I think Dany would be delighted to learn that Jon is a Targaryen, because it just allows her to keep things in the family line and keep tradition alive. If it's anybody... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so yeah, her mindset and family mentality makes it seem like she would be totally cool with it. Jon, on the other hand, seems like somebody who would absolutely not be cool with this information. So I'm wondering if it's as ruthless as her maybe setting Winterfell to, on fire, so he no longer has an ancestral home and he's like forced to go. I mean, that's probably a bridge too far for a show that has burned many bridges and gone arguably too far in the past. But I'm trying to game theory this thing out a little bit, get some interesting options on the table.
Well, what option is what the Northerners learned that they're being ruled by or answering to a Targaryen? All the Northern lords who swore to the son of Eddard Stark, and when they learned that he's not, maybe it's a civil war. Maybe we're seeing the North, in the face of much larger conflict, once again crumble over petty BS. So I'm still going to go with the obvious answer. I think this is undead dragonfire. But you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe there's something else going on here, whether it's Daenerys or some very unhappy Northern Lords.
See, that's why I have you on this segment of the show, because I didn't even really think about the potential of a northern civil war, but that is almost an equally likely possibility, I think, at this point. So let's pivot to the other potentially big reveal here, and that is that TV Line wrote this article that they didn't specifically mention Game of Thrones by name, but they're talking about a quote wildly popular Emmy-winning award series or Emmy-winning series on a premium cable network that returns in 2019. So all signs point to this being Game of Thrones that they're talking about. And this report is that there is a huge pregnancy twist that is coming in the next season. The unlikely pregnancy will have more than a few implications, both dramatic and darkly comedic, they say. And they also say that even though viewers are going to immediately assume that they know the identity of the baby's father, that assumption might not be as clear as it appears. So what do you think about who they could be talking about here?
Oh, I think you and I both had opposite knee-jerk reactions as to who this is about. I thought it was referring to Daenerys, and it's a unlikely pregnancy because she was left unable to have a child after the events of season 1, where she essentially was cursed by a witch, and when she wanted her husband to be healed in a really screwy black magic moment that worked out poorly for everyone involved. But as we know, she started getting busy with Jon last season on a boat. The incest nobody knows about except for a handful of scholars in the north. and it I don't want to say like there's magic involved, but if anybody is going to break whatever curse has been keeping Daenerys from having a child, it would be her family member who shares the same possibly strange mystical bloodline, who may also be some kind of savior for the world as heralded by Melisandre's religion. Mm-hmm. So there's something going on here. Like the flame, you have a guy who represents the Lord of Light, flame, fire, shadow, and then you have Daenerys, the mother of dragons. So if it's ever going to be a match that breaks that curse, it's these two. And also it's directly comedic because she's Jon's aunt. Am I remembering that correctly? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that's dark comedy. It's like, hey, we have this surprising, mystical, magical pregnancy followed by, oh no, this baby is not normal.
And before I get to the other possibility here, I wanted to read really quickly the curse that you mentioned before, the witch Miri Maz-Dur, who sort of jacked up her entire life when Khal Drogo was gravely injured. Her curse was, quote, "When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves, when your womb quickens again and you bear a living child, then he will return and not before." So that is that's the prophecy, so to speak. And some people have, this was written, I think, in the very first Game of Thrones book, which came out in like the mid 90s. So people have
96, I think.
Yeah, people have spent a long time trying to dissect this prophecy and understand and sort of get a little bit ahead of the story and wonder what's going to happen here. There have been like literal interpretations about the sun rising in the west and setting in the east, and whether that means that she has to, I guess there's literal interpretations and then metaphorical ones where she has to travel across the world, to the east and the west and back and forth and all these different things. So there's a lot of speculation about what this could actually mean and whether this is something that could really happen. But I think you're right. The idea of an unknown Targaryen coming together, that could be enough to sort of quote unquote break the spell. But the other option is that it's Cersei we were talking about.
Yeah, this also makes sense. I just want to say because the identity of the baby's father being a surprise possibly does not make sense for Daenerys. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, and that's the thing is this TV line report that says that the dad might be a surprising factor. I mean, it seems like Jon would be the clear father in when it comes to Dany, unless there's some sort of Daario Naharis holdover that we don't know about or something like that. But the one where this makes a little bit more sense to me is in the case of Cersei, where I think it was the season finale of last year. It's been so long, Jacob, since Game of Thrones, and then we have so much longer to go still until we get to see it again. So
over a year at least.
I know if our details are a little bit shaky, you'll have to bear with us. But I think in the season finale of last year, Cersei revealed that she was pregnant to both Jaime and Tyrion. And I think there was, at the time there was a lot of brouhaha about whether or not that pregnancy was real or whether it was just another of Cersei's schemes. I, at the time, thought it was real. And if that is the pregnancy in question here, the idea that the father not being who we think it is means that it's not Jaime. So who else could it be? And that is sort of more disturbing to think about almost than the incestual stuff between Jon and Dany, because it means that Cersei would basically have to be getting it on with like the Mountain or Qyburn or like some of these people that are just that she's surrounded herself with and sort of walled off her kingdom with. I mean, that seems probably pretty unlikely, but what do you think about the idea that Cersei is actually the subject of this this surprising pregnancy?
I waffle back and forth on whether I think she's telling the truth or not. I now think she is. But the reason why this doesn't line up for me is that Cersei has only ever loved one man, and that's her brother Jaime. She's only ever wanted to have sex with one man, and the one time we see her not doing that is with Lancel, who's also a family member, and that was more of a desperate, sad action as opposed to a romantic decision. I mean, she even referred to her I don't think a way to phrase this without being too filthy, about not letting her first husband, Robert Baratheon, finish properly.
Yes.
So it's made a huge deal. The only man she's ever let really be that intimate with her has been Jaime. So the fact that this line says surprising father doesn't line up with Cersei either. So who knows? I think this, like I said, father's identity being a surprise could be referring to Jon not being who he thinks he is, but I don't see it referring to Cersei.
That actually makes a lot more sense than anything I was coming up with, and maybe that's the description there is the key phrasing there is that the surprise identity of the father is a surprise to himself, not necessarily to the audience, and yeah, that definitely plays a lot better than than the idea of Cersei like going to Bone Town with the Mountain. So,
Jesus.
Yeah. All right. So do you have anything else? Game of Thrones, like you said, we're like over a year away, probably, maybe like a year and 6 months even. Do you have any other expectations for season 8 or any other implications of Winterfell burning or this pregnancy that you think is worth considering at this point?
I'm looking forward to seeing Winterfell burnt to a crisp in the opening credits.
Man, that would be they would be opening that up in a pretty huge way. Oh, also, I wanted to mention one last thing. I guess is a good way to wrap it up. Is that there was a report that David Benioff and Dan Weiss, the showrunners of Game of Thrones, might actually be filming fake endings for the show in order to sort of throw off the fans who are paying as close attention as we are right now at this point in the production. I know that filming is probably getting pretty close to wrapping up because they've been going for a little while now. And you mentioned sort of jokingly in the beginning of our conversation that this looks like the kind of fire where they don't need this set anymore. Do you think that they would actually build a set and set it on fire, a fire of this magnitude? Again, you'll have to go and check out the video that we've actually embedded in our article at Slashfilm to see the full size of this thing. Do you think they would actually go that far as to literally set their set on fire just to throw off the fans?
Game of Thrones has a huge budget, but I don't think it's that huge. I think the alternate endings will be a lot of character scenes, a lot of here is a final dialogue between two characters. They film two alternate takes. Are they do they like each other or hate each other in the final scene? Who knows? I don't think they're going to film anything huge as a distraction. But I do think hopefully we'll get the Blu-ray loaded with all the alternate endings where a character says, "Oh, I'm going to go to clown school" instead of becoming king. So.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I think I sort of joked in the article that I wouldn't put it past the Game of Thrones showrunners to go to those extreme lengths, but at the same time, I've been on a lot of film sets and been, wandering around studios. I used to work at Paramount for a while, so seeing, being in sound stages and taking a look at the construction of these sets, a lot of them are actually, if you look at, behind the facades of the walls that are, that make up the living rooms of some of your favorite sitcom houses, for example, a lot of them have old TV shows written on the back of them that they used to be a part of a totally different set. So it seems really wasteful that they would actually just literally set fire to this entire huge thing, even though the exterior of Winterfell may not be, as interchangeable as some other parts. I'm sure there are plenty of aspects of that set that could easily be slotted into a different show as soon as Game of Thrones comes to a close, or actually maybe even be used or repurposed in one of the upcoming spin-offs or prequels or something like that a little bit later on. So yeah, I don't really think that they set fire to this set, as entertaining as that might be for them. I mean, that would be a pretty legendary fake out if they were to do that. Yet another way for Game of Thrones to sort of enter into the record books.
Completely random trivia. If you ever watch Gone with the Wind again, pay close attention during the burning of Atlanta, because they're burning a lot of King Kong's old sets.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I did not know that. Cool, I'll have to check that out. All right, so that's all we have for this episode of Slash Film Daily. You guys can find more about all the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features that you can find at slashfilm.com. You can subscribe to this show on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, and all of the popular podcast apps. Please feel free, again, to send your feedback and questions and comments to peter@slashfilm.com, and make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in that email in case we decide to read it on the air in a future episode. Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes as well, and spread the word. That helps us tremendously. Jacob Hall, where can we find more of your work online?
I am on slashfilm.com every single day, and I am on Twitter, where I am at Jacob S. Hall.
And my name is Ben. You can find me writing at slashfilm.com as well, and you can find me on Twitter at Ben Pears. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.